Welcome to this Last Mile Profits video, the last word on the last mile. How can we perfect locker selection? Stay tuned to find out more on this important question.
Modern Expo provides an integral ecosystem of screen-operated lockers, screenless autonomous solutions, refrigerated lockers, and even personal parcel lockers, powered by in-house developed software.
Gary, today we're going to be talking about perfecting parcel locker selection. Really important topic because I don't know about you, but I've got several stories where people either went about it the wrong way or perhaps took some wrong decisions. So that will be the topic. We recently posted an article on Parcel and Postal Technology International. I say we because I wrote it, but with help from some of my friends. What did you pick out of it that you thought was really worth stressing? If at all, of course.
Well, I mean, I think just to reiterate what the challenge is, I met with Accenture last year, a good friend of mine I worked with when I was at Royal Mail, and he told me that they'd done a recent survey of all the companies in Europe that were in the parcel locker world and had some form of activity with it, and got to 106 companies. Now, if I was a customer and I was faced with a dizzying choice like 106 potential organizations, it's a massive challenge. I think the article was really interesting because it focused on how to pick a locker. You know, do you need a screen? Do you not need a screen? You know, do you need payment? Do you not need payment? But more importantly, it's like how do you pick a supplier? You know, choosing the right supplier for you. You know, again, if you're buying 20, 500 or 20,000, there's a completely different purchase process for that. And that's what I found interesting from the article.
Maybe, we said we'd share some real examples. I'll give some of the horror stories that I've seen. So one of the horror stories, I will not name the supplier because it wouldn't be fair, but actually a very large supplier about 5 or 6 years ago had basically sold their lockers all over the place. And then they had their own internal financial and other problems, and they basically stopped being able to upgrade the software, provide some key service elements to the machines. And it led to the fact that actually a couple of players were really in trouble. Some of them managed and then basically rewrote the firmware and bought other machines. But some people were really, really in trouble. So that's one story. And I'll leave you to share one before I come to my second story.
Well, there's kind of this order of magnitude issue. If you want to buy 50, then pretty much you're buying retail. You're going to buy lockers that are off the shelf, and you're probably going to try and use as much as you can the manufacturer's standard software or maybe software from another provider. If you're going to buy 5,000, your supplier is going to say, how would you like the lockers to be? Would you like them this height, this width, this depth, this color? The world is your oyster because you're going to be spending millions. We were approached by a customer that wanted to buy 450, and he had a very specific custom idea of how he wanted the locker to be. And the business I work with, the scale we're at, 450, they're just coming off the shelf as if you were buying 50. So he was stuck in this sort of hinterland of wanting something specific, but not really having the bargaining power or the purchasing power to get what they wanted. So you've got to come back to the point, you've got to map your project back to the product that's available rather than the other way around.
I think that's a really, really good topic. And I think that, you mentioned that there are, was it almost 200 suppliers just in Europe? If you took the world, including China, probably God knows how many times you'd multiply that by. But I think there are, even for smaller players, there's always a way, but you need to know who to talk to. So there will be either suppliers who are hungry to sell more machines, and they would give you the capacity to be, should we say, more bespoke in terms of the model because they're hungry for new business. Typically, if you look at Europe, they're going to be from Central Eastern Europe. Gary, I don't know if you mentioned, I think you did, but China is a place where it's going to be really difficult. The big Chinese manufacturers, if it's not got 3 zeros behind the order number, you've probably got a bit of a challenge. But I think it can be dealt with, but you really need to know what you're doing because otherwise you take a very expensive long-term decision that is suboptimal.
Yeah, so I was walking the aisles at Parcel and Post Expo last year in Frankfurt, as I know you were as well, and I came across a manufacturer that I hadn't heard of. They're from the Eastern Europe. They had a very smart-looking locker on the stand and a nice poster that gave all the list of functionalities. And I said, how many have you got in the field? And they said, oh, this is the only one, but if people are interested, we can make more of them. So I'm like, okay, we're not quite at the point where we need to worry about this as a competitive threat. So the barriers to entry with parcel lockers are relatively low, but the barriers to doing it right are incredibly high. So you need to check the pedigree and the history of the organisation you're dealing with to make sure they've got the ability to cope with the scale and the flexibility to cope with customization at the same time, and that's really hard.
Absolutely, and there are ways around it. By the way, I have to do a little bit of a plug here for Last Mile Experts, because we have a partner and a client that had exactly this issue. They were working with a very, very big e-commerce, and they needed to demonstrate that although they were a small company, they needed to scale up. And the way they did it, with a bit of advice from their friends, was basically to find several subcontractors, reliable subcontractors, who could produce at an agreed standard for them. One thing many people don't know, that even some of the biggest names in the industry actually do subcontract. The key thing is to subcontract with proven design, quality control, etc. But Gary, moving on so that we cover, I think, another issue, which I think is important, is how many lockers should you order? I've seen so many of our clients coming and saying, well, look, we bought our first 20 or 30. What do we do now? My take on that is that 30 is basically far too many to really do a small pilot, and far too small a number to be significant. It's a pretty much no man's land. Or have you got different experience?
Well, I think 20 is a small number either way. But to get a deep, because we genuinely believe in locker density, and I think there's another topic here to discuss about slipper distance and how far apart lockers should be. We firmly believe they need to be very, very close to each other, because the alternative is home. If you want to compete with out of home, you've basically got to make it hyper convenient. So the worst thing you can do with those 20 lockers is put one in each of 20 towns. Or spread them across a city the size of London or Berlin and hope for the best. They're going to be as rare as unicorns on the street. People won't know what they're for or what to do with them. And you're right, you will fail. If you put 20 in close proximity, you saturate a district or a region or a suburb. People will become familiar with them. You can market locally and get people interested in them. I think you've got more chance of success. It takes a very bold organisation to order 2,000 off the bat, by the way.
Well, or you do what Impulse did in France. You either have, or what they did, buy a large PUDO operator. So you've got the density, and you start supplementing that with lockers. That way you get the best of both worlds. You've got the slipper distance, but you slowly start replacing PUDOs in locations where it makes sense.
That's a huge organisation with very deep pockets, coming fresh off a float with a couple of billion in the bank. You're talking potentially postal organizations or carriers that have got capex constraint. It's very difficult for them to find, 10 million, 20 million down the back of the sofa to buy a large PUDO operator.
But Gary, let's leave this one to think about next time. But I'll tell you something. Most large postal operators, with the exception of one that we both know in the UK, have their own network, a large network. So in a way, they've got that coverage. Not always the case, but look, this could be a brilliant topic for another Last Mile Profits video where we talk about density, how to achieve it, because I reckon there's a few tricks that can help get that achievement.
Thanks for watching this Last Mile Profits video. For more up-to-date last mile news and analysis, subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn.